The story of the queen is centuries old, yet even today it shakes the heart of anyone who hears it. This is the tale of a kingdom unmatched in glory and splendor, but inside its golden walls lived shadows so dark that light could barely find a way in. At the heart of this story is a young and beautiful queen, forced by fate to carry a burden no woman should ever endure. She grew up in a palace where lamps of gold illuminated the halls, where every chamber was scented with rare perfumes, and where the throne stood taller than any rival king could imagine. Yet behind those shining walls, a conspiracy was growing, a web of control that would bury her dreams alive. As a child, she wandered freely in the royal gardens, laughing among the flowers, chasing butterflies, and listening to the melodies of birds. Unlike other children, her dreams were not of jewels or gowns. She dreamed of open skies, of the wind in her hair, of freedom as vast as the river's flow. She did not know that the threads of her destiny were being woven by the very family she trusted. Her father, the king, was a man of stone, ruling with iron hands and seeing his daughter not as a soul, but as a piece in the great game of power. To him, her happiness had no value. The only thing that mattered was preserving the throne and locking the bloodline within itself. As she grew into a young woman, her beauty became legendary. People compared her face to the moon, her presence to a heavenly spirit. Songs were sung in her name, and poets wrote verses about her charm. But beauty, for her, became a curse. When she reached the age of marriage, her father and his ministers decided that her hand would not be given to any foreign prince, for that would weaken the throne. No, her fate had already been decided. She would marry her own brother, keeping the crown sealed in one family, no matter the cost. That was the moment her soul broke. The girl who once dreamed of horizons suddenly found herself trapped in a prison more terrifying than any dungeon. She begged her father with tears in her eyes, falling to her knees, pleading that she not be forced into such a cruel bond. But the king's heart was like marble. "Daughter," he would say coldly, "the kingdom is greater than your dreams. Your will has no place here. This marriage is necessary for the survival of the throne." And with that, her tears became meaningless in the face of power. The wedding day arrived like a nightmare dressed in gold. The palace shone with towering chandeliers, walls draped in silks, and carpets laid thick with jewels. Outside, the people were ordered to celebrate. Music was played, drums were beaten, and false joy filled the air. But inside her chamber, the bride's tears fell heavier than rain. Adorned with priceless ornaments, wrapped in royal gowns, her forehead crowned with jewels, she was the saddest bride to ever walk to the altar. A bride without laughter, a bride without hope. After the marriage, the palace's brightness faded, leaving behind silence and shadows. The brother who was now her husband began to enforce his dominance over her. He would tell her that this was destiny, that obeying their father's command was their sacred duty. But for the queen, this was not destiny, it was imprisonment. At night she would stare at the moon from her balcony, whispering prayers that she might transform into a bird and fly beyond those suffocating walls. Her chamber became her cage, and her tears, the only companions of her sleepless nights. But her sorrow did not end with marriage. In the palace, whispers and schemes circled like vultures. Courtiers spoke of her life as if it was draped in luxury, yet none of them understood that a golden cage is still a cage. They did not see the invisible chains that bound her spirit. To them, she was a queen draped in jewels. To her own heart, she was a prisoner whose pain no one could hear. Her deepest agony was not only being bound to her brother, but also her forced silence. In that kingdom, the king's word was law. To question him was treason. To resist him was death. She could not cry out to anyone, for even her whispers would have been seen as rebellion. So she drank her pain like poison, silently, endlessly. Her silence was her scream, her tears the only language her soul could still speak. Time moved slowly, carrying her suffering with it. Yet with that suffering came an unshakable realization. If she spent her life drowning in tears, she would vanish completely, leaving behind nothing but shadows. Somewhere deep within, she decided she would not let her pain destroy her. She would turn it into strength. She began reading, searching for wisdom in ancient texts, for comfort in poetry, for courage in philosophy. By candlelight, in the lonely hours of the night, she wrote in secret diaries, pouring out all the cries she could never utter aloud. Some of her servants pitied her and wept for her, though even they were forbidden to speak of her misery. The king had commanded that no one must ever share a word of the queen's sorrow with the outside world. Her grief itself was declared a secret, a forbidden truth locked away behind stone walls. But destiny has strange ways. One day, an unexpected visitor arrived at the royal gardens. He was an old traveler, a wandering sage who had seen many lands and carried the weight of wisdom in his eyes. When he saw the queen from afar, he read her suffering at once. "Child," he said softly, "your eyes scream louder than your voice. Your soul is bound in chains. But remember this, after the darkest nights always comes the dawn. No prison lasts forever." For the first time, the queen broke down in front of a stranger. Tears she had hidden from the world flowed freely, and the sage spoke gently, reminding her that true freedom begins within the heart. If the heart is strong, no wall can hold it captive. His words struck her like lightning, not with destruction, but with awakening. That night she realized something new. She was not powerless. She could choose to live not just as a victim, but as a woman who would find strength even in despair. Her cage was still there, her crown still heavy, her silence still enforced, but inside, a fire had been lit. She would no longer cry only for sorrow. She would begin to think of ways to reclaim her destiny. The queen's life after that moment with the sage was never the same again. Something inside her had shifted. She was still trapped within the golden walls of the palace, still bound by a marriage she never chose, still watched by eyes that never let her breathe freely. Yet her heart had begun to burn with a new light. She carried within her a silent rebellion, one that no guard, no king, not even fate itself could extinguish. Her tears did not stop, but now each tear was not just sorrow. It was a promise to herself that she would endure until the day her chains broke. In the palace, life went on as though nothing had changed. Feasts were held, music filled the halls, visiting envoys brought gifts and flattery, but the queen's soul was somewhere else. She had learned to hide her grief behind a mask of composure. The courtiers believed she had accepted her role, but deep within her, she was preparing herself for something greater. She spent nights reading and writing, searching through history for stories of women who had fought against impossible odds. She studied the movements of power in the court, the weaknesses of those who surrounded her, the shifting loyalties of the ministers and nobles. What began as a survival instinct grew into something more dangerous, a plan. Her brother, the man forced upon her as husband, remained both a torment and a sorrow. He could not understand her silence, nor the fire in her eyes. He tried to convince her that they were bound by destiny, but the queen knew it was nothing but chains disguised as fate. Each day with him deepened her resolve that she would one day find freedom. Sometimes, when he slept, she would stare at him with eyes full of questions. How could someone born of the same blood become her jailer? How could the same childhood she once shared with him end in such darkness? Yet, in the deepest corners of her suffering, the queen began to understand something profound about herself. She realized she had a strength greater than any sword, greater even than the throne itself. The strength of endurance, of patience, of silent will. This strength was invisible to the men who thought they controlled her, but it was real, and it was growing. Years passed. The queen's beauty, though still radiant, began to carry the shadow of sorrow. Songs of her charm were replaced by whispers of her melancholy. The people outside the palace began to notice that their queen never smiled, that her eyes carried storms no jewels could hide. Some pitied her, some ignored it, and some spread rumors that she was cursed. But the queen knew the truth. She was not cursed, she was waiting. One night, as the moon hung low and silver above the gardens, she returned to the place where she had once spoken with the sage. She remembered his words, "After the darkest nights always comes the dawn." She whispered them to herself like a prayer, and in that whisper she found the courage to imagine what dawn might look like for her. It was not just freedom from her forced marriage she longed for. It was freedom to live, to choose, to be more than a pawn in the game of power. That very year, the kingdom began to shake. The old king, her father, who had ruled with iron and ice, grew weak with age. His health faltered, and with it, the absolute certainty of his power began to crumble. Ministers whispered in corners. Nobles eyed the throne with hungry ambition, and the kingdom felt the stirrings of unrest. To everyone else, this was chaos. To the queen, it was opportunity. For the first time, she began to take part in the council of the court. At first, her presence was dismissed as ceremonial, but when she spoke, her words carried weight. She had studied long in silence, and now her knowledge unfolded like a hidden sword. She advised with wisdom, with caution, and with foresight that no one expected. Slowly, the nobles who once ignored her began to respect her. They saw in her not just a woman trapped, but a leader in the making. Her brother, however, grew jealous of her growing influence. The more she spoke, the more the ministers looked to her for guidance, and the less they looked to him. His insecurity turned into anger. He tried to confine her again, to silence her voice, to remind her that she was his wife before she was a queen. But she no longer bowed to his threats. With calm defiance, she reminded him that she was born not just to be his bride, but to be the heir of a kingdom. For the first time in her life, she stood up to him without fear. The court began to divide. Some stood with the brother, bound by tradition, while others began to rally behind the queen, moved by her wisdom and the dignity with which she bore her suffering. The palace became a battlefield of whispers and schemes. Each step of hers watched, each word weighed. Yet, the queen did not falter. Her patience had sharpened into strategy, her silence into strength. When the king finally died, the question of succession erupted like a storm. The brother expected the crown to fall easily onto his head, but to his shock, many ministers turned their eyes to the queen. She, the woman who had been forced into marriage, the silent sufferer of injustice, was now seen as the true symbol of stability. The people, too, began to whisper her name, remembering her sorrowful eyes and seeing in them not weakness, but the reflection of their own suppressed struggles. The brother raged. He accused her of betrayal, of seeking power that did not belong to her. But the queen, calm and steady, reminded him that it was not she who betrayed blood, but the throne itself that demanded a leader strong enough to bear its weight. Her words cut through the court like fire, and for the first time, her voice was louder than his. In the days that followed, conflict threatened to tear the palace apart. Yet through it all, the queen stood like stone. She remembered the sage's words. She remembered her silent vows. She remembered every tear she had swallowed and turned them into unbreakable steel. Her brother tried to imprison her once again, but by then it was too late. The court, the nobles, and even the guards saw in her the rightful ruler. They defied his commands, and for the first time, the queen was free, not by escape, but by victory. When the crown was finally placed upon her head, the moment was heavier than she had ever imagined. It was not joy she felt, nor triumph, but a deep, aching remembrance of everything she had endured. She thought of her childhood dreams, of her forced wedding, of her sleepless nights, of the sage's words. She thought of the woman she had been, a prisoner of her own blood, and of the woman she had become, a queen forged in fire and sorrow. Her reign began not with celebration, but with quiet strength. She ruled with fairness, she listened to her people, and she vowed that no daughter of the kingdom would ever suffer as she had. The palace that had once been her prison became her court of justice. The chains that once bound her became the very reason she broke the old laws and built new ones. Her pain had not been in vain. It had shaped her into the ruler her people needed. And though the scars of her past never truly faded, she wore them like armor, a reminder that even in the darkest prisons, light can still be born. She became not just a queen, but a symbol, a testament that no matter how deep the chains, no matter how heavy the crown, the human spirit, once awakened, can never truly be caged. Thus, the queen who was once forced into a marriage with her own brother rose from sorrow to sovereignty, from silence to strength, from prisoner to legend. And though her story was written in pain, it ended in a triumph that echoed through centuries, teaching all who would listen that even in the cruelest of fates, there lies the seed of freedom.